All right. Well, welcome everyone to this Lunch and Learn. I'm really excited. Well, to start with, for those of you who don't know me, I am Michelle Veazey. I am the Advocacy Director for New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility. And we are very fortunate to work with some incredible people in the advocacy space. And on the top of that list, today we have Lucas Meyer, who is with Pretty Strategies and Catalyst Advocacy, right, Lucas?
Yeah, yeah, one and the same,
The same. Um,
literally.
and Sam Evans Brown, who is the CEO of Clean Energy New Hampshire. So I know many of you on this Lunch and Learn have worked with Sam over time. So we are really excited to have them both share their insights with you and really give you some time to ask questions about what the most effective way to work within our current legislature is. Given the environment today, it's taking some adjusting, but these guys are the experts and they will be able to share, really some great ideas for how to really build success for the future. So we are going to be recording this, and you probably got that message. So if you want to share this with anyone else, we welcome that. And we'll also share their slides and contact information. I'm hoping that, if you've got questions for either of them, you feel very comfortable at the end of this reaching out and connecting with them. But if not, please get in touch with me and I will make the connection for you. But with that, I am going to hand this over to Lucas and Sam for their very wonderful presentation.
Goodness, Michelle. Really setting the expectation high here. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lucas.
I'm Sam Brown. If you have a hard time hearing us at all, the fact that we're sitting next to each other sometimes throws my computer off. Yeah, so we're gonna have to swivel this laptop back and forth because it's like a real shotgun microphone. So if ever we're not sitting directly in front of it and you're having a hard time hearing us, I'm gonna look to Michelle's face. And Michelle, I want you to just give me the shepherd's hook and we'll
I'll
make sure
do
the
this.
swing. But I'm Sam Evans Brown, and we're happy to be doing this buddy comedy here for you all today.
Quick, like, who am I? Why am I here? Grew up in Concord, have worked in advocacy in the nonprofit space for a number of years. Before that, did a lot of campaign work, have run various coalitions in the state, have worked with nonprofit clients, corporate clients, have done the traditional orange badge lobbying work, as well as the outside the dome, more community organizing work. And also have the good privilege to work with New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility on the advocacy work. So that's why I'm here today. What about you, Sam?
So I'm Sam Evans Brown. Previously, I was a reporter with New Hampshire Public Radio. I spent 10 years there. My joke is that at NHPR, I essentially got sort of like a PhD in the environmental movement and climate advocacy while on that job, and then took that learning to come over here to Clean Energy New Hampshire, where we're working on trying to decarbonize the energy system in the particular environment of New Hampshire's purple state politics. And could talk a lot more about what that looks like, but that's why I'm here.
Groovy. All right, the rules, very strict rules here, folks. Be present, be active. This is ultimately for you. So if you don't actually want to be, you don't have to be. But we think we have some exciting stuff to talk about. And if you're on this call, I'm going to assume you are somewhat invested in trying to move the needle in our state, and really excited to dive in later on some of the work Sam is doing. And to always remember that you all have a lot of power in this climate, no matter what. So at times it can feel like, in any year, it can feel like adding your voice to the process is sort of like, why bother? If everyone has that attitude, nothing happens. And again, since you are all here on this call, that is an indication to me that you understand that you have power. But never forget that your story, your voice has power. What we'll cover really quickly here, and again, this is all in service of you. So if you have questions in the middle, please do unmute, shout at us, put it in the chat box. We're not looking at the chat box, so we'll rely on someone else to lift up questions that come in there. But we'll do a quick advocacy primer just on the real bare bones of what advocacy looks like, what tactics we can use, We'll then have Sam, our resident expert, give us a quick primer on some of the net metering dynamics at play, some specifics. And then we're going to pull it back out using some legislation this session to talk about how folks might be able to plug in and what effective strategic advocacy looks like, which kind of gets into some of the landscape pieces we'll get into earlier. But again, Q&A at the end, but really hopefully is throughout all of this. The New Hampshire legislature, perhaps intentionally, is a confusing, lawless place. So there are no bad questions. And also happy, I mean, you have Sam here, who is the go-to guru on a lot of clean energy items. But if we have other questions about the legislative process and how things are going to play out over the next year, also happy to answer that. Appreciating it's folks' lunch hour, a little gossip is always fun. So happy to dive into that, although we are recording this, so it has to be polite gossip. Anyone have any questions right off the bat before we dive in? Groovy. All right. Sam and I are both coaches, so I think it's important to always step back before we get into it about what the landscape looks like. Is there a new paradigm? Obviously, we had another big election last fall. In New Hampshire, not too much changed at the state level. Republican margins increased in the House and the Senate. We still have a Republican governor. At the federal level, obviously a change at the White House, but our congressional delegation stays the same. So from where we have been taking part in advocacy, and a lot of the tenets of what we have talked about previously still hold true in what I call the quote new paradigm. Obviously, at a federal level, there is a lot of unknown and a lot of turnover. We're not really going to get into too much of that here today because we're focusing at the state level. But obviously in New Hampshire, we do appreciate the disproportionate impact of the federal government in New Hampshire, but did just want to add that caveat. Number one, there are still a lot of problems in the state, and there are a lot of bills moving through the legislature right now to address those problems. Even though it can feel like at times there isn't much productive work happening at the state house, there still are some really exciting things happening. And you are all people who can help move the needle on those issues because you are a powerful constituency. The business community, the small business community, you as business leaders, as employers, as employees, as executives, all carry a disproportionate sway with elected officials because of that positioning in the business community and people's prioritization politically of small businesses in our state. So even if you're not someone, and when we get into it later, even if you're not someone who lives in a legislator's district, you still have a powerful voice with any one of the 424 members of the New Hampshire General Court by virtue of who you are. So to get back to the start, we were talking about you have power. This is what I'm talking about. So already talked about the landscape. Can we actually get some things done this session? Yes, we can. And we're going to get into that after we do a quick primer. Again, I want to rip through this because I want to get to the good stuff. But businesses can be a force for good in the state. Having worked on a lot of campaigns in the state, again, a high premium put on your voices and your opinions. And that can range from a really broad array of issues. But your position, your experience as a business leader can be really persuasive in moving the needle for legislators in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. And I think a theme you will hear here is you will continue to hear in this conversation is not losing sight of the long-term goals in our state and appreciating what can we do in the short term to build onto those long-term successes. Does anybody want to, I'm curious for anyone on the call, if anyone here has done advocacy recently, and I'm going to, how as broadly as you'd like to interpret that, but I'm curious if anybody would be brave enough to speak up on some advocacy they've done recently.
Sure. In a little bit of a different vein, trying to strengthen our software technology sector here in New Hampshire. So working with people in Concord, UNH, casting a wider net, public-private, starting to make some progress.
Sounds like a lot of like
Slow.
coalition work, bringing folks together.
Yeah, trying to set up a monthly call between people at UNH, people at the New Hampshire Business and Economic Affairs, New Hampshire Tech Alliance, so that we can like at least start to talk about what we think we need and how we're going to move forward.
So not necessarily legislatively specific, but more broadly for the sector, what needs to get done for there to be success.
Well, but the idea of keeping the New Hampshire Business and Economic Affairs and New Hampshire Tech Alliance in is so that they can influence the legislative agenda, because that's our big challenge right now. Is we say we're a tech hub, but we're not getting a lot of support from the state, or
Gotcha.
as much as we could use.
So that is a great example of a very like diverse like advocacy opportunity where you're touching on a lot of these three arenas as I break it down into advocacy. One, the court of public opinion. Two, with elected officials, and three, with bureaucracy. And every time you're engaging with these different arenas of advocacy, it might look different what you're saying and how you're going forth, and it might just be specific. You might just want to take one of these arenas, but it is important to be mindful as we think through how do we advocate. These are the three places traditionally that we will want to be taking action. And then you always have to consider, you know, in the court of public opinion, how do people get their news these days? You know, when I started working in 2012 versus where people get their information now, it's a very different world. And that's changing, I don't know, feels like really rapidly. With elected officials, we have a volunteer government in the state, from your town and your city to our state government. That is very unique to New Hampshire, but that also uh, should inform how we do our advocacy, appreciating that the 400 state reps have about a dozen full-time staff to administer their work. So if you're trying to get information in someone's hands, you're probably going to have to do that personally, because they're just a volunteer, um, really doing a full-time job, which is a whole other TED talk we can have later. And then with our bureaucracy, thinking of folks, for example, who work in early childhood, you have to appreciate that the folks at the Department of Health and Human Services are very understaffed. And that is not their fault, but you have to work within the confines of the system we have. And so that might inform how you do your advocacy. So always making sure you take a step back before you engage in the arena. What are the dynamics to consider?
And I just want to step in and say these are not, the way that Lucas has this laid out is that these are like these three separate spaces. They are not at all, right? There's a huge amount of interplay between all of them. And I just give a quick story from our neighboring state in Maine. In my world, Maine went from being a laggard to a leader, particularly in the solar industry, very, very quickly. And sort of they passed a policy that really stomped on the accelerator in a way that now has sort of come back to bite them. And so essentially what happened there, Governor Paul LePage was in office for a very long time. As the election approached, a group came together to write sort of a policy package that they wanted to hand to the next governor when that person came into office. It included a really aggressive solar policy that, for the wonks out there, we have net metering. This really looked a lot more like what's called a feed-in tariff, which was it's a much more stable and predictable policy. It also tends to be something that is sort of more of an early market driver as opposed to a more market-based program. And they passed this thing as soon as Governor Mills came into office. They went from having less than 100 megawatts of solar to having 1,600 megawatts of solar in the space of a few short years. But now their consumer advocate, so if we look at, this is arena number 3, the bureaucracy started to make a lot of noise about the cost of that program. That then got into the court of public opinion where, opinion makers were pushing a narrative that, hey, your electric bills are going up because of solar, which that now has led to this incredible feeling of urgency where Democratic lawmakers feel like they have to do something about this law that they championed just a few short years before. And now Maine is looking to retroactively claw back some of the revenue that they created for these solar companies. And so just to drive home the point, all of these spheres have interplays between them. And so thinking really hard about cause and effect between who are the opinion makers, who gets opinion out, and then how that drives decision maker.
So really quick, how we do it advocacy, meetings and events, getting together with legislators, decision makers, bureaucrats, education and lobbying of those decision makers. Not every meeting has to be a lobbying meeting, can just be for information, education building, communications and shaping the narrative. Obviously, you have to get your message out if you're trying to do some advocacy, persuade people to your side or mobilize people, build partnerships and coalitions. This is why we have NHBSR, to help you all find, and this is what we're doing here today. We have Clean Energy in New Hampshire here, trying to find how do we plug in the NHBSR voice into existing coalitions, not recreating the wheel, being strategic and effective with your time, because as business leaders, we can't be wasting your time. If there's an advocacy opportunity, we want to make sure we're plugging you right into where it is the best bang for your buck, and then activating your team and your network. This is like one of the more, what I would impress upon folks like the most is like being a leader. It is amazing what you can get done with you being a validator of urgency, of importance, even within your own network. Being the person to raise an alarm goes a long way in the state because of how small scale a lot of our advocacy is with a volunteer legislature. But how it also looks with meetings and events, businesses, roundtables, business visits, going to chamber events. If you want to hire a lobbyist, you can do that pretty easily in New Hampshire. That's obviously taking it to another level, but you can also lobby as a citizen, as a business leader on your own behalf, writing op-eds about an issue that's of particular importance to you. Sam and I both work with a lot of people who are always looking for business voices to write op-eds. So there's always someone looking for you. But even if you have your own idea, go for it. Joining sign-on letters, Michelle and the NHBSR team often will send around opportunities for you to add your voice to a business letter. That to me, depending on where you are at, is a really, high impact, low resource ask where all you're just doing is offering up your name. But I can tell you as an operative, having a deep list on a sign-on letter is so useful. And all you have to do is fill in a Google form. Like that's a low ask, high reward. And then again, activating your network, being an emissary for the issue, getting other people engaged, involved, and being someone that can deliver, hey, I did this, like Bill was talking about with some of the tech work, being able to then get additional people to take action, be a force multiplier. We call it vote tripling on campaigns. You want to be able to have you're a volunteer, find 3 other people to vote for your candidate. You want to have your one advocate find 3 more reps to help, flip them. So those are some examples of how it looks. I tend to think, it's always good to build a plan. And even if it's just a small action you're taking, having taking a step back and writing it out and thinking, from your endpoint backwards, what do you need to do? Depending on where you are at as an advocate or where your company is at as an advocate, this is something, certainly I'm happy to help with. If you're someone who wants to help figure out a plan for a piece of legislation or something happening in your community, having a plan helps keep you accountable, which is always really important. Couple quick rules to follow. As advocates here from the business community, making the business case, that's why people are having you there. They want to hear the business case. Understand the mission that you are weighing into. You do not need to be an expert, but understand why you're weighing into it. And understand, are you raising awareness about the problem? Are you pushing a specific position or concept during a legislative process or a budget negotiation? Or are you helping close the deal, which is what we're always looking for, closers. Have a clear opinion and voice. Don't waffle. Be very clear about why you're taking action, and do not try and dress up your voice. Be who you are and deliver your voice. People will resonate with that. Smart brevity. A lot of words get thrown in front of all of our faces every day. I have had to beat the liberal arts degree out of me every time I start to write an op-ed. I write moreover, therefore, and I think, come on, get that out of here. No one wants to hear that. Be concise, bring your local comparisons, your context, your stories. That's really important. Speak for your employees, your employees, your customers, suppliers, competitors. I think this is a great example here. An accountant with 50 clients has credibility on simplifying the tax code, while an accountant with 50 employees has credibility explaining the value of accessible childcare. Open your mind as far as, what you might not realize is actually an area of expertise and credibility. It actually is for a lot of folks, especially in workforce development. Reframe questions about hot button issues. Obviously, this is front of a lot of folks' mind right now. But the business community really has an ability to break through. We've seen this in other red states with bans on trans athletes, the business community coming out and saying, hey, this is not good for welcoming workplaces. This is not places where people want to live. That has broken through and helped, reframe hot button issues. Like we told earlier, have a plan, understand why you're doing what you do. Without a North Star, you tend to wander on these things, and it can be really easy given the enormity of challenges facing some of our communities. But a plan helps you stay disciplined and pick your battles. Again, to that earlier point, there's a lot going on. Find a really specific opportunity, perhaps some net metering legislation in New Hampshire. Perhaps that might be an opportunity specific. That really is a nice Venn diagram of a lot of different priorities. Unfortunately, you can't swing at every pitch. So being able to pick your battle is really important. What time? How we doing here? 12:22. That's pretty good.
Okay, so now that we're giving Lucas a chance to drink some water and hydrate, I'm gonna pitch in with what we think is a really classic case study of where the business voice could be really, really valuable, and it's a live issue right now. So commercial and industrial net metering is something that we've been trying to expand in New Hampshire going back multiple years now. And as you'll see, we almost got it all the way to the finish line 2 years ago. But now we think this might be the year that it could really go. So, okay, net metering, what is net metering? This is a kind of busy slide, which if anyone wants it for the gory details of what net metering is, I'm happy to send it along. But I just like to have things for your eyes to rest on while I talk. So listen to my voice, don't get distracted by the words on the screen. Net metering, the core of this policy was that when we had analog electric meters that were a wheel on a stick and they spun one direction when you were buying electricity, there was a kooky engineer down in Quincy, Massachusetts, who thought, if I wire an electric panel so that it would feed electricity back onto the grid, I think that wheel on a stick would just spin the other direction. And in fact, that's what it did. And so the electric company comes at the end of the month, your meter has been spinning one way at night, has been spinning the other way during the day, and they just read the net. They read whatever the number is at the end of the month, and you're billed on that net reading. And that's the core of what net metering was. And so that's old net metering. If you look at the left side of this graph, you're getting a one-to-one reimbursement. Every kilowatt hour you sold was being reimbursed at the same value as kilowatt hours that you would buy. New Hampshire has, it's a trend all across the nation that we're trying to get a little more granular and determine what actually is the value of every kilowatt hour. New Hampshire has moved away from one-to-one net metering and is now doing the right side of the graph. This is what we call in the business net metering 2.0, where we've given net metering a haircut. For any exports at the end of the month, you get less value than the kilowatt hours that you buy. So that's what net metering is. We're under a net metering 2.0 regime now here in New Hampshire. We've been there since 2017. Now, you may have heard that net metering is really expensive, and that net metering, when you put solar panels on your roof, it costs your neighbor money. The reason for that is not necessarily because of what's happening here in New Hampshire, it's because of what's happening in other parts of the country, or what has happened historically, in particular in California. So California's policies tend to drive the narrative around clean energy because they're the big behemoth, they're the blue monster that Republicans like to punch down on. And so when you hear people talk about net metering, they're typically talking about California's net metering policy. California also had a net metering 2.0, but even under their haircut that they gave to net metering, a typical residential customer, any customer who's installed anything up to 1 megawatt in size, so we're not even talking about residential customers, we're talking about fairly large solar arrays, are getting 52 cents a kilowatt hour. the similar comparison, and actually I should update these numbers. In the fall, a similar project in New Hampshire between 100 kW and 1 megawatt in size was getting 13 cents. So when people talk about cost shift coming from net metering, they're genuinely they're not comparing apples to oranges. Our policies have historically been much less generous than the states that have seen these really big cost shift numbers. However, that narrative has really taken hold, so much so that the state of New Hampshire they required the Department of Energy to conduct a study and say, hey, what is, how much should we be paying these resources? How much should we be paying anyone who's generating electricity out on the edge of the electric grid for their kilowatt hours? And so this value of distributed energy resources study, missing a D there in my title, I apologize, came up with the number. And they said, the value of these resources is anywhere between 11 and 17 cents a kilowatt hour, which, by the way, doesn't include things like the value of the carbon emissions that we're avoiding. That's the extra 5 cents a kilowatt hour that's on top. But even without those environmental attributes, we currently in New Hampshire are under reimbursing these resources. If you have a commercial rooftop solar array in the state of New Hampshire right now that you've slapped on the top of your Walmart, and it's over 100 kW in size, this month you're getting paid 8 to 9 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on what utility service territory you're in. And the state's own study says that you should be getting somewhere in the neighborhood of double that revenue because of the value that you generate. And when I say value, I mean this is value for the utilities themselves, because they're avoiding having to purchase energy from the bulk transmission system. They're avoiding having to pay transmission fees. They're avoiding having to pay for capacity and ancillary services and all these other things that are part of how electricity is delivered. So what does that mean? That means that and this is analysis from a study that we did as part of a current docket before the Public Utilities Commission. Genuinely, we believe that the more solar that we install, the more rates go down in the state of New Hampshire. And that is particularly true for large consumers, that large consumers installing more solar results in the large CNI rate class having lower rates across the board. I point all this out because there's been this narrative throughout the Sununu administration that that expanding net metering is going to cause a cost shift. And over the past 2 or 3 years, we've really drilled down on that question. We've done the analysis and we found that simply is not true, which has started to open the door for more consideration of expansion of net metering. So in 2023, we got Senate Bill 79 passed. Senate Bill 79 would have increased the cap on net metering, which is currently set at 1 megawatt. It would have bumped it up to 5 megawatts specifically for commercial and industrial consumers. So exactly the type of constituency that I think I'm hoping that we're talking about today here at NHBSR, that those types of customers that could use more than a megawatt worth of generation in order to reduce their electric bills would be able to do so, which currently they're not allowed to do. That bill was vetoed. It was nominally, as you see if you're reading this veto message, it was nominally because there was a typo in the bill that got through. I would argue that even if that typo hadn't been there, Governor Sununu would have vetoed that bill as well, because really, when you look at the politics of this issue, the pushback to net metering hasn't been coming from rank and file Republicans. It's been coming from the governor himself, who has asked rank and file Republicans not to send net metering bills to his desk, and has vetoed them multiple times when they've gotten to him. And why do I know that? So this is a survey that was done by Citizens. Oh gosh, Citizens Count. I was going to say that, and then I was like, is that actually the name of the organization? Citizens Count, prior to every election, surveys all of the candidates that are running for office. And for a couple of years now, they've asked them about this net metering question because it's been something that's so entrenched. What you see here is that there's a pretty small chunk of folks that are running for office that actually even have an opinion about this. There's a huge number of lawmakers who are in this mushy middle of, haven't really thought about it. They see the question and they're just like, next question. They have other responses. If you ever want to, some entertainment, you can read through what those folks type in when they say other, and some of them are pretty off the wall. Some of them are actually quite reasonable, but in fact, like the biggest chunk is folks that are in fact for a blanket expansion of net metering all the way up to 5 megawatts, which is not even what this industrial C&I bill is. This is a much more tailored and circumscribed expansion just for C&I customers. But even if we say blanket for absolutely anybody in the state, are you for going up to the 5 megawatt cap? The biggest chunk of respondents says they are for it. Now, so I will just say, the next thing I was going to do, which I think I'd prefer not to do since we're going to record this and put it up on YouTube, was I was going to show you a list of the individual lawmakers who have answered this question and say that they're either for or they're undecided on net metering. And what you'll see is that there's a huge number of even Republican lawmakers who are either in the green camp or in the undecided camp, and who are genuinely open to considering this policy. And so this to us shows a real opportunity to change the dynamics of this particular debate. So this year, we worked in collaboration with the Business and Industry Association of New Hampshire to put together Senate Bill 106, which is essentially another run at what Senate Bill 79 did. It's to expand net metering up to 5 megawatts for businesses. So you could put together either a 5 megawatt array that would just benefit one business, or you could assemble a group of businesses who could collectively come together and invest in a community solar project that they purchase all as one group, or become customers of all as one group. And so Senate Bill 106 is our second run at it. It's actually up for a vote today. It's gone through the Senate once on the consent calendar. So every senator, Republican and Democrat, voted for it as it having been on the consent calendar. It had to go to finance, even though I'm not sure why. Lately, it seems that whenever a state agency doesn't like a bill, they like to give it a fiscal note, regardless of whether it has fiscal impact or not. So it went to Senate Finance, came back out once again unanimously, and is going to go back to the Senate today, and then head over to the House. The House is where we will have trouble, and so when we talk about the advocacy opportunity here, that's where we really need help. We need to look at the list of lawmakers that are open to this policy, and we need to have their constituents reach out to those lawmakers and say, hey, this bill matters to me. I'm an employer. I'm a job creator. I suffer from the New Hampshire's high electric rates, and I want to reduce my electric bill so I can employ more people and make more jobs. And hopefully we can swing a meaningful number of Republicans to come and vote for this bill again, which, by the way, they've done already. We've gotten this through a Republican-controlled House of Representatives once before, but we'll need to do it again. And so that really is the opportunity. So you can do that with one-on-one calls to your House representative. You can do it through sign-on letters that we collectively put together. You can be reaching out to the media to say, hey, there's this opportunity coming forward, and I really hope that my elected officials will take it seriously. And you can do it through continued advocacy through organizations like the one that you're engaged with right now. So I think that's what we've got for slides.
Mm-hmm.
And now you just get our Brady Bunch deal. Lovely bunch.
Awesome. So we do have a couple of questions here. One is from Andrew Schuyler. With the governor likely to be on the short list for the 2028 VP slot, how do you think that impacts, I know, how do you think that impacts advocacy on issues like clean energy and sustainability?
What a question.
I have thoughts on that.
You let it rip.
Yeah. Okay. So Governor Ayotte, I genuinely think we have an opportunity to work with Governor Ayotte to create space for herself as a leader on sustainability issues. And she has already shown a willingness to do that. In 2016, when she was running for re-election, she was the sole Republican senator to endorse Barack Obama's Clean Power Plan. That was in part because of a huge amount of advocacy that was done, particularly by the League of Conservation Voters and directing constituents to call her office. But I would just say, I think there were probably a lot of Republicans who were getting calls like that, and she's the only one who took that step, which shows something. It's funny, you can read the national press that came out about this at the time, and a lot of it was sort of like this cynical move by this Republican person. And I think that's too simple. And you can watch her actions after she left office. So after Senator Ayotte left office, she served on a number of boards, several of which showed a real interest in this particular area. So one was Bloom, which is a clean hydrogen company. Their thing is currently they're selling hydrogen-powered forklifts, particularly to Amazon and Walmart and other large distributors that are trying to figure out how to get away from propane-powered forklifts. And then the second is she served on the advisory council for CREZ, which is Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions. And I've had a ton of interaction with CREZ over the years. I find them to be a really smart and sincere group of conservative folks who are trying to move the Republicans towards positions of climate advocacy. And in my conversations with people who worked at CREZ, they've said, yes, Kelly Ayotte was sincerely engaged and motivated to work on this issue. So if, in fact, if genuinely the first time I've heard that the Governor Ayotte might be on the short list for 2028, if in fact that is true, I think that's a positive sign because it's good news for this issue that perhaps we might have leaders who are a little bit less entrenched than the ones we've had in the past.
Yeah, my exasperation was on 2028 speculation. I'm still trying to get to 2026. And just to echo Sam, I think it's part of the reason why we're having this conversation is what, the whole idea behind expanding or trying to do more advocacy is doing more strategic and effective advocacy. And this is certainly the clean energy lane, appreciating we're walking into a budget year that is going to be, I don't think it's draconian. This is the clean energy issues, what Sam is talking about, this legislation, while there is like a fiscal note that isn't super real, this is not a bill that requires $20 billion from the state to invest and make happen. It's a bureaucracy, it's an administrative tweak, right? So that is why we're having this conversation. I think part of the takeaway is like, there is a lot of work that has been done previous to this moment, and there'll be a lot of work coming out of it for additional clean energy needs. But this is a place where we can make progress, but we do need people to engage in it and keep the momentum rolling forward because we want everyone to feel really good about getting this done and that it's good for everyone and it's a good business argument. So that's part of the impetus around having this conversation today. What's next?
Awesome. Another question, I think this is for you, Sam, is can you explain cost shift and how that works?
Yeah, so this can get really nerdy really fast, and so please, I apologize if I start to go down the wrong rabbit. But the very basic argument, which makes a kind of intuitive sense, is you install solar on your roof, you eliminate your electric bill, you're no longer paying for the grid, and you're still getting electricity from the grid during the times of day when your roof is not generating, right? And so it's been the argument for years from the utilities that like, hey, we're losing revenue. We have to get that revenue from somewhere. And so that means that we're going to have to get it from other customers. The thing that has been absent from that discussion has been that the utilities themselves actually see a benefit from more generation happening locally, which is some of those things that I rattled off before, right? They're not having to buy bulk power from the transmission system. Their transmission rates go down because their peak demand goes down, which according to the open access tariff that they're subject to means that the amount that they pay to ISO New England goes down. And there's a whole litany of other benefits that can be genuinely quite difficult to enumerate because because of a lot of reasons. Like they don't have meters all over the grid. The grid is old and stupid. Sometimes they don't really even know how much electricity is going where. And so it can be hard for them to say, hey, we're seeing benefits because of this local generation. But I will say that the thing that's been really interesting is that the utilities have definitely have completely changed their tune on this, to the point where in the most recent net metering docket, they were doing the math for us, where they were saying, listen, we know what the costs of net metering are. The costs are somewhere in the neighborhood of $36 million in the last rate period. What we don't know is how much the benefits are. But here, we're going to do the math and we're going to try to estimate them for you. And so $36 million of cost, we estimate that the benefits in that same period are between $32 and $40 million. So they're saying the benefits of having more distributed solar might actually be greater. Benefits to the utility itself might actually be greater than the costs. So that's really the sort of nerdy policy debate, is what are the benefits and what are the costs? And the last thing I'll say about this is that, that's going to be a dynamic picture. We're going to need to continue to tweak our net metering policy as the grid changes, because the costs and the benefits will change as the grid changes too.
Hmm. Awesome. Probably another one for you, Sam. Governor Ayotte is trying to shut down offshore wind for New Hampshire, where the other New England coastal states are still moving forward. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Governor Ayotte does not have the power to shut down offshore wind. But I would say that the governor's sort of public pronouncements on offshore wind are the least of the industry's problems. The Trump administration has a great deal of power to put a stop to offshore wind, but I would also say that the industry's biggest problem is actually the current interest rate environment, and that's the thing that has led to a slowdown in projects, and genuinely a slowdown in projects that happened long before the election. I mean, we were seeing projects getting canceled. We were seeing projects having to renegotiate their contracts with the states that they had made agreements with. We were seeing supply chain problems, and a lot of that is a result of the high interest rate environment that we transitioned to after frankly the supply chain shocks that COVID caused. So I mean, I would just say the rhetoric from the Ayotte administration it's a lot of noise. It's not the problem for offshore wind. The offshore wind's got a lot of hurdles to get over.
Okay, so I was down in New Bedford a couple weeks ago. Mass is still moving forward. That's what's at Vineyard Wind, and New Bedford's the staging for Block Island and for Vineyard Wind. Um, again, it just seems our coast isn't big enough, but we sit between Massachusetts and Maine, which that can somehow just bog down efforts in our neighboring states, just in case someone's got to travel through our waters. She's aligning with Trump. She's definitely going to use his bully pulpit, and I would, on rates, they came down 3 times at the end of last year in the last 4 months. Now the rates aren't going to decline again because Trump's screwing around with tariffs. But we have a choice. Like, do we get in there and say we're behind it, or we're aligned with New England, or to me she's just taken, this is meant to appease the orange one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I would just say, from my opinion, and before I left New Hampshire Public Radio, I just want to share. I spent 2 years doing a long form series on offshore wind. So I've also been all the places that you just listed. The difference between the Sununu administration and the Ayotte administration is entirely style. And in substance, I would argue that they were about the same. The Sununu administration had the Office of Offshore Wind, which never really did anything, and was, in my opinion, window dressing for their lack of action on this issue. So you made a point about boats having to go through our waters, and maybe that being a way of slowing offshore wind down. I would say our waters only extend 3 miles offshore, and I don't actually know how many boats are going through those waters. So it's all just to say, I hear you. I like it's distressing what's going on in offshore wind, but I don't know that Governor Ayotte's antics on this are the thing that are the real hurdle.
So I exclude rates. And so the real hurdle now is Trump.
Well, so
Fair.
offshore wind gets built on the promise of long-term power purchase agreements that
Yeah.
are mandated legislatively, which Governor Sununu had always said we're not going to do any of those, and Governor Ayotte has continued that position. So the only way you build an offshore wind farm is if a state or utility says we're going to sign a 25-year contract with you for that power at a certain price. And that's what has to happen for states to drive progress on this issue.
Right, but that's what's happening in Mass, Maine. Like those negotiations are going on. There's a lot, let's just say, a lot more forward progress in the rest of our coastal neighbors
Sure.
than, we seem to be the I don't know, the peanut butter in the gears as it relates to New England.
We are not driving progress on offshore wind. If that's the question of the statement, I agree with it wholeheartedly.
That is very true. I got a question in the background asking, and this is in general about advocacy, so probably more Lucas, is that so there are people on the call that are not necessarily totally following all of the energy and net metering, but are there ways that we can be most effective right now on issues like knowing, and this is me just saying, like knowing we're kind of going into crossover, how can people be most effective right now and in the next couple of months?
So, and this is teasing a little bit of homework I have for Michelle to do before next week, which is getting, and I don't know if I'm breaking news here, Michelle, so shut me up if you need me to, but we are going to be sprucing up the advocacy pages on the NHBSR website to include what are like the top, not 12, but the top 1 or 2 or 3 pieces of legislation that are working their way through the New Hampshire General Court. Who are the coalition partners that perhaps have email forms or, what Sam was talking about with target legislators? I think specific to this net metering bill. And again, Sam and other advocates are not expecting you to be an expert in the policy area. And Sam and his team exist to handhold members like you who are interested through this process. So Sam is going to have a list of like 10 legislators across the state who we need to just hammer with positive accountability about how stellar it's going to be when they vote for this net metering bill and how much of a champion they're going to be for the state by doing it. Even if you live in Dunbarton and they're from Deering, it doesn't matter. You can still reach out to them as someone who's a leader in your community, and you will be shocked. Back to earlier in the slides, these are volunteer legislators. They get a lot of form emails, which are still useful. It shows volume, it shows mobilization, but you can send a personal email to these folks and they will respond. I have sent thank you emails to some Republican folks in the past who have voted on or against gerrymandered maps. And I was so shocked how quickly I got like oh, thank you. I never get thank you emails from folks. So a personal touch, a short message can go a long way. And again, thinking of your resource, your time, you could just write a very short 3-sentence note to one of these representatives, and you never know. And maybe it opens up a relationship, and maybe you get a bit of intel that Sam and his team didn't have that you're able to report back to Michelle, to report back to Mike, to get to Sam. There's a whole network of folks who are working on this, but your piece could really be the difference. We're not going to know unless you do it. So you have to do it.
Yeah. Now, I do want to say, like, can't say enough about New Hampshire is a small state and a very collaborative one. And so it's, I think it's great that we as businesses can come together and support like all the critical work that Clean Energy New Hampshire is doing. And, like New Hampshire School Fair Funding Project. I mean, there's so many great groups that we work in collaboration with that I think we have, wonderful resources in the state to reach out and help us move important issues forward. I have another question here, and I'm going to not sure I fully have it, but I'm going to read it carefully.
Can I have a
So-
suggestion? Instead of reading the whole thing, Shaloma, would you be willing to come off mic and ask the question
Yeah.
yourself?
Good idea, Debbie. Oh, maybe she's not where she can. So for the sake of time, I'll just say everybody can read it. Actually, you guys can probably see it too, right? So to add to the point
Ooh.
about cost shifting, didn't you say that even the net metering being proposed doesn't compensate fully at the purchase cost for the electricity generated by solar? So even aside from the benefits to the grid produced by distributed generation of solar, the infrastructure costs are well covered by the fact that payment for production is less than cost for buying from the grid would be. To
Yeah.
you, Sam.
Well, it's yes is the answer. So which is why at this point the utilities have flipped from being opposed to net metering expansions to being either neutral or supportive, sort of quietly supportive of expansions of net metering, because they realize that hey, this is a valuable way for us to be able to help meet growing electricity demand. And also that it's part of their whole grid modernization plan. They also have seen the light and I think are bought into the future of the grid as being sort of a more distributed architecture. So yes is the short answer, but then I'll also say I love the second bit about messaging to Republicans, and I'll just share a really short story about someone who I think really nailed this, and even though I was frankly I was filled with anxiety about this individual. So there was a bill that was heard on Tuesday of this week in the Senate that was brought forward by a bunch of net metering generators that were concerned that, given the erratic behavior that we've seen at the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission, that they might try to retroactively change net metering 1.0 and net metering 2.0. So and these businesses essentially said, we have made investments, some of them multi-million-dollar investments in our infrastructure based on the promise that this is how the program is going to be structured. And we just want to be sure that status quo will be allowed to reign. And so the bill that was brought forward essentially said, like, the PUC can make changes prospectively, but they can't make changes retroactively. And a Clean Energy New Hampshire member who was just a regular guy noticed this bill in our weekly email that we sent out. And he came into the Senate, and I just found him there sitting there. And he's a retired person who wanted to lock in his energy expenses. And so when net metering 1.0 was still the law of the land, he plunked down, tens of thousands of dollars to do a 10 kilowatt array on his roof. And he basically said, this is my retirement plan. And like, this is my personal responsibility. I've taken personal, like I've invested my own money on my own initiative. And like, don't, his term was, and now I'm seeing this bill and I'm worried that a bunch of restless bureaucrats could come and steal the value of my investment. And so I absolutely think that's the messaging that we want to hit on, is like, this is about the economic value of local generation. It is about independence from these other New England states that are doing other New England things. So we're going to generate it here so we don't have to worry about what they're doing. And I think that those are really winning arguments with New Hampshire Republicans.
And probably nowhere in Sam's talking point document did it include that bureaucrat flying. Restless bureaucrat.
It's going on my tombstone.
And that,
Sam stopped restless bureaucrat.
Don't edit your voice away. Your voice is unique. Your voice will break through and resonate with those folks. And that's a great anecdote of that.
So given we're at almost at time, I'm wondering if you guys can each take 60 seconds and give us some closing thoughts, if you have any, that you haven't already shared with us.
So what I would encourage everyone to be a happy warrior on this stuff. I think there's a real narrative that the New Hampshire State House is a depressing place and that doing this work is hard and it's soul sucking to go over there. While there's a modicum of truth in that, there's another side as well that I think gets that is not told enough, which is that it's a citizen legislature. These people are just regular people. Yes, they tend to be sort of like party activists, but those our party activists are regular people too. And the thing that we have here in New Hampshire that I think you don't realize how special it is until you go to other states is that you genuinely have a huge amount of access to the people who are making these decisions, and nowhere near enough people take advantage of that. So yes, you might get told no. Yes, you're not gonna hit it out of the park, 100% of the time. But we have this resource, which is access to these people, and you should use it, and you should be psyched about the fact that you've got that tool.
Goodness gracious. Yeah, I just plus one what Sam said, and also um that there's a larger community at play here, and that you don't, again, like, you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to know everything. But I think the strength of the New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility Network is that it's a community, and that the entity exists to plug you in a very effective, time effective, and strategically effective way. And the only thing that limits our ability to make an impact is our effort. And it can be hard at times, to Sam's point, to have that happy warrior mentality. But just like I try not to look at my 401k over the past like month and a half and appreciate that time is long, and that in 30 years I'll look back at a blip, hopefully, of the past like, couple months. You just got to keep investing in it, and eventually it'll pay those dividends and advocacy. And I cannot emphasize enough that you really never know what piece of advocacy is going to make a difference, and at what point, and who. And it can, again, it can feel very like, why even bother? But I have literally seen it work, and it honestly keeps me going, because it can be very hard, but it can happen.
Well, and to that point, I want to just say thank you to both Sam and Lucas for really great information. So helpful. But also want to mention to people that we are recognizing as an organization, a convening organization, that it's important for our leaders to be able to come together and talk about the issues that are of importance to them and kind of find community in that. So we have a series of roundtables coming up over the next few weeks, that we invite our members to sign up for. I am going to be sending out a follow-up email. Well, Debbie and I are going to be sending one out, inviting people to sign up. So we have 4 scheduled, one starting next week. And those are to talk about all kinds of issues, but to really, to come together in community and to know that you're not alone in your concerns. And I think it's a way for us to really think about how we can take action as a group, and that makes it a lot easier sometimes to make things happen. So we'll certainly be reaching out to you. Hopefully we can get some business support really out there for that net metering. It's a critical bill for so many of us, and we really want to get things moving for Clean Energy New Hampshire. They're doing great things, and so we want to support what they're doing. So stay in touch and keep an eye on that NHBSR advocacy page, because we, as Lucas said, we're really going to have it cleaned up so that it's not just like old sign-on letters, but it's going to be, here's what you can do today. So thank you guys for joining us today. You'll get the recording and the slides if they're helpful to you, and also Sam and Lucas's contact information so you can get in touch with them directly. Want to mention that Lucas is also doing like one-on-one advocacy support. So that is something that you can take advantage of if you have any additional questions. But thank you both.
I'm here to serve, please.
Oh, can't hear you, Lucas. Sorry.
I said, please do schedule a time. I'm here to help. Your advocacy is really important. So happy to help with anything.
All right. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, Dean.